Now, the Minister for Justice, Alan Shatter, has announced a referendum on the restructure or restructuring of the courts as a part of a major shake-up of the legal system in Ireland. Among the proposed reforms are a unified family court and a court of civil appeal. Join us this morning to discuss the issue and how it will affect us is Barrister Paul Anthony McDermott and family law solicitor Josepha Madigan. You're both very welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you.
I'm going to come to you first because an awful lot of our viewers will be engaged, embroiled, will be going through the family courts at the moment, and it can be an agonising process at best. So is this good news for them?
This is fabulous news, Sinead. I have to say I commend the Chief Justice enormously for these recommendations and also the Minister for bringing in this reform or proposed reforms. There's no question about it that the adversarial system is very difficult for separating clients, divorcing clients, or indeed any family clients that are bringing applications in those courts. And I think if we look at other jurisdictions, like for example Canada and New Zealand and Australia, they have brought in integrated family justice systems to great effect and for the benefit of the clients.
So what changes are going to take place if this comes to pass? What are the proposed changes?
Well, the proposed changes are, and I believe that the Minister has favoured a one family court where there would be two levels. So the first court would deal with most applications and the second court would deal with more complex issues. But I suppose the key change would be that there will be an integrated system, so there will be a welfare assessment system available for clients and also some mediation and ancillary services, and that's extremely beneficial because it makes the system more humane.
But just from a common sense point of view, Josepha, it is Josepha?
Josepha, yes.
Josepha.
Thank you.
Most people who have had no contact with it would actually be quite shocked to find out that that wasn't there in the first place, because it's common sense.
Absolutely.
So why is it taking so long?
Well, I suppose, yeah, you're quite right, and the court structure has been the same since 1924, the last 88 years, and I suppose it should have been there in the first instance. I mean, there are some mediation services available at the moment and in various different courts across the country, but at least it's coming in now, I suppose. It's never too late, so that's a positive step. Also, the fact is one of his proposals. I know it has to be said that in this instance, the Minister is particularly well qualified because this is his private, this is his area of expertise in terms of his private practice. But also something that I didn't realise is I would have thought that any of the judiciary in the family law area would have had training or specific expertise in that area. Yes. And I believe from the notes you've seen on numerous occasions where the judges are actually struggling with aspects of family law, particularly, say, for example, the financial aspects, you know, negative equity, division of property, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, the Minister certainly commented on the training for judiciary, and I suppose the judges do their best in the family law court, but it's such a high conflict situation that having extra training and skills is always beneficial. So I suppose perhaps what he's referring to there is maybe mediation training and training in dealing with that, because the family court is very different from any other court.
You used the word humane, and that was used an awful lot yesterday as well, and it's interesting to me that it's used because that suggests at the moment that it's not overly humane. I mean, would you agree at the moment that people aren't being treated?
I would agree. I think most family lawyers will do their best under the circumstances, as do the judiciary, as does anybody involved in the family court. But litigation in and of itself will just escalate conflict, and we've seen with research in Ontario and in Canada that with early settlement negotiations, which is the approach that they take, and meaningful court appearances together with consistent judicial supervision is of more benefit at the end of the day. So it is great to see these reforms coming in.
Good news. Please, God, yes. Well, Anthony, I want to bring you in here because one of the things in terms of your briefing notes to us for this, the first thing that you picked up on was the speed, or sorry, lack of speed in the court system, and you thought, you know, justice delayed is justice denied, but you thought that this is particularly relevant where family law is concerned, because this is the most emotionally charged aspect of law, isn't it? And it's one of the few areas where things aren't black and white and legal, and there's judgments being called on all the time. So the faster it gets resolved, the better, and probably the better outcomes you will get.
Yes, one of the two biggest complaints people have about law is firstly it costs too much, and secondly, it takes too long. Now, sometimes you need a little bit of delay. Suppose you've been injured in an accident. You want a few months to go by to see what your injuries are like, because you don't want to accept some damages today and then discover in 6 months' time you can't get out of bed. And equally, in criminal law, you need to take time with the investigation. Fortunately, as we saw in Mauritius, if you race into court. So delay isn't always bad. But at the same time, people feel Irish courts aren't quick enough, and that what's happening is people go to court, it gets adjourned again, it takes years. And the biggest problem, and I think it's what the Minister is trying to address, is in Ireland, we're almost unique in this, you can appeal anything to the Supreme Court. So not only can you appeal any final decision to the Supreme Court, but even an interim decision. Suppose the judge simply says, I'm ordering discovery, so you've got to hand over all your financial records to your ex-spouse so they can see how much you're earning. You could appeal that to the Supreme Court. And in every other Supreme Court in the world, they only deal with the big constitutional cases. They don't worry about small issues. Whereas in Ireland, anyone could go to the Supreme Court. On average, the delays are 3 years. Some cases can take 5 or 6 years.
So this is where this Court of Civil Appeal will be very important, and it will remove that. The other thing is in family law, well, I mean, with a criminal case or whatever, yes, you need to take time afterwards because there's the action and then there's the consequences. With family law, this problem has been festering for years before it gets to court. So the prospect of having it dragged out for another couple of years afterwards, it's not just wrong, it is inhumane.
Absolutely. Generally, by the time people get to court, they simply want to get the thing done. They want to get through the court system as quickly as possible. They also want a judge who understands what's going on, because being a judge is actually one of the few jobs you don't get any training for. You're a barrister one day or solicitor, you're then told you've been appointed to the High Court, and suddenly you're sitting and you've got two spouses arguing over pension adjustments and financial things and who should get custody of the children. And imagine if any of us were a judge in the morning, you'd be looking down thinking, well, how am I supposed to decide this?
Let me ask you, did the proposed changes go far enough?
I suppose law never moves quickly, and as we've heard, we haven't changed the system since 1924. If one of your views had been walking down the street in 1924, the court system would have been exactly the same as it is today. So
Which sounds ludicrous.
Yes, and if you think about it, in 1924, people would probably be glad to hear there weren't many barristers, there weren't many court cases. I think there were about 4 High Court judges. We now have 40 High Court judges hearing decisions, all of which can be appealed to the Supreme Court.
In terms of the macro aspects of the changes he's bringing in, obviously the family law stuff and the Court of Civil Appeal are very good, but on the bigger constitutional issues, you wanted to talk about, was it Article 26?
Yep, I mean, this is a very important power the President has, which is if the government suggests a piece of legislation, normally the President signs it in, and until the President signs it, it's not law. At the moment, if the President looks at something and thinks, well, that doesn't look like it's very constitutional, there's obviously a lot of dramatic legislation going through at the moment saying, you know, banks can take people's property and there can be private court sittings to recapitalise banks. The President can say, I'm not signing that. I'm sending it to the Supreme Court for their opinion because I want to see what they say before this becomes law. And under this new proposal, the Supreme Court now will be able to say, we're not dealing with it. Even though the President is very worried about this, we're going to send it back to her until it's
not our remit.
Exactly, and that's a big diminution in the President's powers. And generally, Irish people think the President is very important. As an independent person, can keep an eye on the government. I think people would be surprised that the Minister or the government is trying to take away power from the President in this way.
So that may be a very contentious issue, because that will have to go to referendum.
That would in a referendum, and I can't imagine the Irish people voting to take away powers from the President.
I can't imagine that either, Paul. No.
But in general, much
good news.
Very good news, and much to be welcomed.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Now, if you're looking for a new furry addition to the family, then why not adopt one? We'll introduce you to 4 adorable dogs from Dogs Trust right after this break.